This is Gemara Pesachim Daf Sadi Vov. This is the Daf for a Tainis Esther. Today's shir should be a special schos. Refuah Shlema for Chaim is a Moshe ben Esther. Easier to meet the Mary ben Kiri ben ben Vei Chaim ben Sar Shalom Zivin Reiz Idol Bras Knendel. Ita Basiyam Bas Chai Sayu Selam Mendel as a President Shavalei Shom Bas Namir Shafik of Shir Chanaf Al Davini Teriva Shmuel ben Tihila Daniel ben Chan Reiz Ben Chai Bas Mina Librach Bas Tavi Musa Daniel Indel Adina Idol Bas Shina Mendel Simcha Tovia Bas Avigal Peshas Vibem Vega Devayir Michal Tzipar Nasil Huva Besay Shar Chali Yisrael as well as Chosiver Kamirim Bas Esther Shadil Etel Leah Bas Ita. And just two wonderful updates. Number one, Baruch Hashem, I was just told that Chaim Yitzchak Moshe ben Esther Rezel is actually currently learning together with us. Absolutely incredible, the schos of learning the kayach of tefillah, as we see how someone went from such an incredible length, and we're looking forward to very, very soon wiping his name completely off the Chaylim list, as well as Yudemir ben Yakira, a young boy who celebrated his bar mitzvah this past week after being clean from leukemia for 100 days. Also, Baruch Hashem, doing fabulous. Looking forward to wiping his name off the list. And Amir Hashem, many more of our other chaylim should have Yeshuas, especially today, a day of Tainis Esther, a day of wonderful tefillah. Let's pick it up in the bottom of Sadiyahayim and Beis, the last line. Ba'i Rav Yosef. We're in the middle of a discussion. How we learned in the Mishnah yesterday, and of course everyone realizes we're getting these shiurim up early. Please, I hope everyone could plan for their Purim appropriately. So the last line, Ba'i Rav Yosef, we're coming off of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, a carbon pesach that's brought b'tumah, you're not allowed to eat it. Who's not allowed to eat it? This is tumah hodshot, tumah techiyah b'tzibur, as we've seen many times. Someone who's a zav is needed the yoladais, they can't eat it. But yet we saw something very unique. They're not allowed to eat it, but if they do, they don't get karis. And yesterday we discussed what if they push their way further into the Beis Hamikdash incorrectly. So it comes along today, Rav Yosef, and he asked the following question: By Rav Yosef, Dachaku Tamei Mesim Va'achlu Emurei Pesach Haba B'Tama. What is the halacha? Someone who's Tamei Meis, who the carbon is being brought on his behalf, but he goes and he eats too much. He goes and he eats as Rashi at the end of the Amid says, the klayus, and he says the kaved, the different parts which he's not supposed to eat. But is he allowed to eat these? Again, a similar question as we move along to Sadivavam and Aleph. Let's let the Gemara explain Mahu. Do we say that once the Torah allowed someone to eat the carbon while he's Tamei, it also allowed him to eat the emurim, these different fats and limbs, the kidney and the diaphragm? Whatever the Torah allowed, that's what it allowed. Whatever it didn't allow, don't take too much. Amar Rava, Mechti. Tomas Imurim Mehechas Rabbi. Where do we know that the din of Tomas Imurim, Tomas Basar, the whole din is learned out from the din of Tomas Basar? The Rabbi is Imurim. So therefore, says the Gemara, says Rava, answering the question of Rav Yosef. Whenever there's a din that you cannot eat the carbon when you're tamei, there's a din you can't eat the emurim. However, therefore, they will be allowed to eat the emurim. B'toma. Says the Gemara. By Rav Zera, another question. Similarly, emurei pasach mitzrayim hechak terinu. Not similarly. Same vein, but the emurim, the different fats of the Pesach in the first year, we're going to learn today a lot about that first carbon Pesach. That first carbon Pesach, what do they do with the different fats and limbs? There was no mizbeach to burn them on. So what do they do with it? Says the Gemara something absolutely fascinating. How do you know they didn't make a spit, they didn't roast it on a fire? The Rishayim try to figure out what exactly Abai is saying over here, but let's continue in the Gemara. Wait, there were three mizbechas. Three mizbechas, they're Mitzrayim. Where do they have three mizbechas? Sham ala mashkoy val shtei mezuzos. The mashkoy, the lintel, and the two doorposts, those functioned as ki'ilu mizbechas. And there was nothing more, and that is where they had the mizbechos. Let's see Rashi, a very, very interesting Rashi over here. Rashi on the last of the wide lines at the top, Rashi says, Gimel mizbechos lehazois adam. I'm like, there is a mur and leisha mizbeach. The Gemara is talking about for the sprinkling of the blood, they would sprinkle it on the doorpost, but not for the burning of the emurim. So seemingly, and different Rishayim point out from on this Rashi, it sounds like the doorpost had a real din of a mizbeach. We know they tied the animal to the doorpost, they had to put blood on the doorpost that year, but we never fathomed that it has a din of a real mizbeach. That's what the Gemara here is teaching us, says Rashi, for the hazah, for the sprinkling, the doorpost and the lintel has the din of a mizbeach. Says the Mishnah Ma What are the differences between the Pesach, that first fateful year, and forever and ever? Pesach Mitzrayim had to be taken on the 10th day. What does it mean? Taken doesn't mean that's the day they were makdish it, they sanctified it as a carbon. Is that the day that they separated it as a carbon? Bit of a machlokes, but it was on the 10th of Nisan. That's when they separated the carbon. Number 2, they had to take the grass strand over there to get sprinkled with it, a special din, the hyssop tree by the Pesach Mitzrayim. They had to put it on the doorpost, the lintel and the 2 doorposts. And furthermore, they had eaten in haste. They had eaten for one night. Pesach Dair is Nai Kol Shiva. Pesach Dair is Nai Kol Shiva. So 4 dinim that we're seeing over here, the Pesach Mitzrayim, number 1 is designation of day number 10. Number 2, we needed a special hazah with Agudas Eizayv. Number 3, it had to be put on the mashkiv, the Shem Mezuzais. And number 4, it had to be eaten bechipazin, it had to be eaten with haste. And obviously the Gemara is going to go through and explain each and every one of these. Says the Gemara, we know this from the Chsiv, says in the Torah, tell the entire congregation of Klal Yisrael, that on the 10th of the month they should take this, the carbon Pesach has to be taken, designated. We said Machloik is designated or sanctified on the 10th day. Only this carbon Pesach, this the Pesach Mitzrayim, that first year, that's when it's taken on day number 10, but nothing else. Says the Gemara, 1 second. What does the Torah say? It should be for you watching Mishmeres till the 14th, meaning you have to watch the carbon for 4 days until the 14th. Is it only this carbon when they left Mitzrayim? They had to do beaker, they had to check the animal for 4 days prior to the Shechita. But other carbonis, the other Pesachim do not need beaker, do not need to be watched over and checked for 4 days. But says the Gemara, that's not true. But Tani learned to the price of the first white line, big bagba goimer. Minayin letami chetoin beaker dalad yamim kaidim shchita. How do we know that every carbon talmid fasting, the carbon that's brought every single day, they had to check over 4 days prior to the shchita? Shnemar says in the Torah, tishmeru la'akriv libamayadai. The word tishmeru means they had to watch it. Ulalanu aimer. And by the Korban Pesach it says Ve'elechem lemishmeres araba'asar. So Tishbu on the mishmeres, what does that teach us? Malahalor by Pesach Mitzrayim tan bikar dal yamim kaidim shchita, before the slaughtering. Avkan tan bikar dal yamim kaidim shchita. So the Gemara is bothered. You just told me it's a special din, only that 1 year. What do you mean? We see every single Korban Pesach has to be that. Answers the Gemara, shiny awesome, 5 lines into the white lines. It says Tishmeru upesach dair. It says Tishmeru by the carbon tamid. That's how we know the din of beaker of checking the carbon for 4 days applies to the tamid. Says the Gemara, Pesach dair is nami aksiv the Pesach for all other generations. It says va'avanata as avoida hazois. Very important pasuk. Says the Gemara by Pesach of dairis. It says va'avatan you should do it as avoida hazois b'chodesh hazeh on this month, and from this pasuk we learn a very important rule. Sheikol avodas chodesh zeh kozeh. All the avodas of this month, of this year, of all dairais should be the same kozeh like that original carbon Pesach. That pasuk is extremely important because the Gemara now is going to continue and try many different differences between the Pesach Mitzrayim, that first year, and Pesach Dairis for all of the years. And this is going to always come back to this pasuk. This is going to be the pasuk that equates all Pesachim for future generations to that original faithful Pesach. So says the Gemara, how can you tell me that there's no din of beaker of checking the animal for 4 days for subsequent carbonites? We see the Torah says which learns out that this carbon has to be like all other, like the Pesach Mitzrayim. Says the Gemara, when the Torah says hazeh, this one that comes to exclude the Pesach Sheni. The kavosa that has to be similar to it. That's what we learn out from the pasuk of Savoida Hazois. But not that is going to be a din of beaker for all other carbon, all other generations. Elameata says the Gemara D'chsev va'achlu abayzar b'layla says you should eat the flesh on this night. Hachanami dezenecha b'layla v'inachanecha b'layla. And now is where we're going to go through a full list of different psukim, different drushes, which seemingly are going to point out that only hazeh on this night of the Pesach Mitzrayim, and we're going to ask, wait, but does that apply for future generations or not? So number one, it's really number two, says Gemara. It says in the Torah that you have to eat it b'layla hazeh on this night. Is it true that only that Karban Pesach was eaten at night? But ve'in acher nechol b'layla amar kra, meaning, by all, are you telling me that all Karban Pesach for future generations are not eaten at night? Therefore, says the Gemara, amar kra v'ata zavoida es avoida. That same pasuk, which teaches me that what? That the karbanos of future generations are like that first year. So the obvious question, so why did the Torah say va'achlu es habasar b'leila hazeh? What's that coming to teach me? What's that limitation? Rav Elazar ben Azariah of Rav Akiva. The din of Rav Elazar ben Azariah and Akiva, as you see here in Rashi, that Rashi points out, a din that we've seen before, totally different din, nothing to do with that which we're discussing right now. Alameata says the Torah, someone who's uncircumcised is not allowed to eat the Karban Pesach. That carbon by the Pesach Mitzrayim, but all of the generations it can yet eat it. Yes, eat it. Amar Cross says the Torah of Havadata. Again, the same exact sequence. We're going to say, is it only by Pesach Mitzrayim? We're going to answer no. Havadata equates all future generations. Then we're going to ask, okay, so what's that limitation? A boy, it referring there to that year. Lamali says the Gemara, boy eino eichel avlu eichel b'matzamar. In itself, the arel, the uncircumcised person cannot eat, but he can yes eat matzah and mar. Elameata says the Gemara v'chol ben neicha lo yichal boy. Says any ben neicha is not allowed to eat it. Hachanami, you're going to tell me the same thing. Are you going to tell me he's only not allowed to eat the Pesach Mitzrayim to keep future generations of future Pesachim? Amar Kra says the Torah of Avadata again to equate future Pesachim for that Pesach. Elaboy lamali. Boy, Hamaras Hadas, please tell us only that carbon was Hamaras Hadas. One who went off the derech, one that rebelled, Hamaras Hadas themselves betruma. But it is not possible elsewhere, meaning by truma. V'etzrich says the Gemara, why do we need two psukim? One pasuk teaches the din of Arel and someone who's uncircumcised. One pasuk that teaches of Ben Nechar. Says the Gemara of Itzrich Lemechtav Arel, Itzrich Lemechtav Ben Nechar. Why? Because Rachmana Arel, I would have thought Misham Demais. Because an Arel is a person who is by definition someone who's disgusting in the eyes of God. He doesn't have a bris milah. He doesn't have the sign of a yid. So he is someone that's viewed as disgusting. Avul Ben Nechar Loi Ma'is. But a Ben Nechar, he's not one who he himself is inherently disgusting. Emalaya would have thought not. Therefore, it says the Gemara Tzricha, we had to write the second case. Yes, Ben Nechar, I would have thought he's someone who doesn't look up to our Father in heaven. He's not keeping the Torah and mitzvahs. Someone who doesn't have a bris, he's a from Jew. Emalaya Tzricha. Therefore, we had to write both Arel and Ben Nechar. Says the Gemara continuing. It says in the Torah that two different types of avadim cannot eat from the carbon Pesach. Only that carbon of leichlu Pesach Tairais. Amar Krav Avadatok to equate future Tairais to future Pesach to that Pesach. Boy Lamali, why did it say boy limiting? Boy Amar Sadas Paiselis. Only in carbon Pesach does rebelling apostle in Amar Sadas Paiselis Betshuma. Says Gemara Lameata Umalta Oisai Az Yechal Boy Umalta do a bris milah and then eat from the carbon. Achanami the boy in Oichal. Only this carbon you can't eat without the bris of leichlu Pesach Tairais. Amar Krav Avadatok to equate them all, to teach me boy milas secharim va'avodim ha'kaves. Only in this carbon Pesach rishon does if your servants and your children don't have a bris is in ma'akev. A concept that we've seen a few days ago that if someone has a child that didn't get a bris, the father himself is disqualified from bringing the carbon. Ve'milas secharim va'avodim ha'kaves. From bringing Betshuma, it's the din in Pesach and not in all Kachim. Elmeata says the Gemara concluding this section, Dechsev, Ve'atim Leisish Rubai, which we've learned extensively, you're not allowed to break the bone. Hachanami, you're going to tell me the bone of Shavuot Pesach Darius, you can only not break the bone of this carbon Pesach Mitzrayim for the future generations. You could on our cross as the Torah of Avadata. Ela boy, Lamali, why do we need boy? Says the Gemara, boy because of loy b'pasul. The whole din of breaking a bone is only by a carbon Pesach, which is kosher, but not one which is pasul. Elmeata, I'm sorry. There's one more. No, you cannot eat it raw. Mimenu from it. Only from this carbon the Pesach of Mitzrayim you cannot eat raw. What is mimenu? What does that teach me? A different din of Rabba Rav Yitzchak, as Rashi at the end of the Amid points out that Malhal and Arul Aser b'Pesach Avkan Arul Aser b'Maiser Sheni. A different din. That's why it says mimenu. And again, we've seen in the Gemara that the word of Avadat always equates to Pesach Sheni with the Pesach Rishon. And countless limiting words, mimenu, boy, in it, all these words coming to teach us a din specifically about the Karban Pesach, or answers the Gemara something different. Says the Gemara, and another one of the differentiations is that Pesach Rishon had to be eaten in haste. Minolin had to be know that Damar Cross says the Torah of you only eat Nechel B'chibazin. Other years you don't have to eat Karban Pesach B'chibazin. Pesach Torah is now you go Shiva is Allah there for 7 days. Amai Koi, what's this going on? Ilema Pesach. Are you telling me it's going in the Karban Pesach? Pesach Shiva Miiko? What are you talking about? There's no din of Karban Pesach for 7 days. As we turn along to Sadivav, Amid Beis, Ella Chametz. It's going on the din of Chametz. That's which is Nagia for all 7 days. Michlal, what does that infer? The Pesach Mitzrayim Laila Echad. Sounds like the Pesach Mitzrayim can be only for 1 night. V'sulay and nothing more. Vatani we learned to the price. Basically, Yoimer. Minay in the Pesach Mitzrayim Shenechem Mutzoy Noyig Ela Yoim Echad 1 day, not just 1 night. Tamulayim Elayich Chametz v'Samach Le'Yoim Hatem Yoitzim. But we see clearly it's not just 1 night. Answers the Gemara, Lachikamar Leila Echad, V'hu Adin LePesach Dairis Chimutza Kol Hayayim, Pesach Dairis Noyis Kol Shiva, and the Pesach of all generations is Noyis for all 7 days. As you see in the last Rashi before the Mishnah, Rashi points out, Elochi Mashma V'Nechel B'Chipazin B'Leila Echad. V'hu Adin LePesach Dairis Nami Leila Echad, Pesach Mitzrayim Chimutza Noyis Kol Hayayim, Pesach Dairis Kol Shiva. That's going to be the difference that the Mitzrayim they had an Isser of Chametz that first day, whereas for 2 generations we have it for all 7 days. Says the Mishnah, Sadivavim and Beis, Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Says Rabbi Yeshua, Shamati sheTemuras Pesach Kareva. I heard that the Temura, the exchange of the Karban Pesach, we'll explain what that means in a moment, could yes be brought as a carbon, and I also heard Temuras Pesach Einai Kareva. The opposite statement it can't be brought vainly the Farish, and remember which is which. Amar Rav Akiva. Now Farish, I'll explain. If you found your Pesach before you shechted the Pesach, so what's going on over here? What's going on over here? Someone has Pesach a beautiful Karban Pesach, and before he gets a chance to shecht it, it goes missing. Where's Sally? We don't know what the animal is. What do? So we bring upon another. We designated. We set aside a second Karban Pesach, Pesach B. And now the question is: did you find Pesach A before you shechted Pesach B? And now says the Mishnah, you found A before you shechted B. What's the halacha? You have to let it graze until it gets a mum. But yimkar, you sell and you buy with the money shlamim a carbon shlamim. And so to a temura, what's a temura? A temura is anytime you have an animal and you exchange this animal for another animal. The sanctity is very interesting. It does not go from A to B like we would think. It's not true. Why? Because temura's usher. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to exchange the kedusha, and therefore, if you did it, not only does it not work, but both A and B become a carbon. So if I have a carbon over here, it's incorrect, and I say I want the kedusha from this to go onto this. Now, halacha is it goes onto that, but as well it remains in the original status. We'll see more about that in the Gemara. So says the Gemara again: if I have a Pesach A and I lost it, I separated Pesach B. Nothing to do with temura yet. And then I find Pesach A, says Rav Akiva Aniyafarish, Pesach Shnimzi, you find the Pesach, then what do? You let it graze till it gets a mum. You bring with it a shlamim, and so too if you exchange it for another animal, it's also brought as a shlamim. If you found A after you already shechted B, then karav shlamim v'chein temurasai, then A is going to have to be a carbon shlamim, and it's exchange. Again, the halach is going to be whatever it itself is. If you did a temura, if you exchange it onto another animal, that animal has the same level of kedusha as we'll see in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, V'leima Pesach Karav, Pesach Eina Karav. What does Rav Yeshua mean? I remember, says Rav Yeshua, there are times that the temura is yes brought, and there are times the exchange is not brought. Why do you say there's times that the Karban Pesach is brought, the Karban Pesach is not brought when you lost it? He's Gufa teaching us that then there are times that the exchange is not brought as a carbon. Itmar says the Gemara, Rabba Amar. Says Rabba, let's pay attention to this din of Rabba, because we're going to conclude this din of Rabba, and then tomorrow we're going to have a second Lashain, how Rabba learned. Says Rabba, I'm sorry, this is not the point. I jumped the gun. Apologies. One more time. Says Rabba, new din. The din in the Mishnah is before the Shechita and after the Shechita. Meaning, when the Mishnah taught us that if you found the old animal, then the halacha is you found it before the Shechita. The halacha is you let a mum. If you have it after the shechita, you have to bring it as a carbon. That's referring to the shechita itself. Rav Zera Amar Kodim Chatzos Ar Chatzos. Nothing to do with the shechita. Has to do with the time of the shechita, which is Chatzos. That's when it determines whether you found the animal or not. Well, Rav Zera, I asked the Gemara, Ketani Kodim Shechita Pesach. It says in the Mishnah that you found it before the shechting of the Korban Pesach. Answers Rav Zera, the obvious teretz, the time of the shechting. Says the Gemara, and this machlekes Rabban and Rav Zera is truthfully indeed kitanayim machlekes tanayim. Ha-pesach shenim ze kodim shechita yira lachar shechita yikarev. Rav Elazar Aimer kodim chatzos yira lachar chatzos yikrav. That is the machlekes Rav Elazar and Tanakama is the same machlekes that we're having over here between Rabbah and Rav Zera. Says the Gemara, Achar Shchita Pesach Yav Yishlam. So he said, again, I have Pesach A. I lost Pesach A. I separated Pesach B. What happened? I shechted Pesach B, and then I found Pesach A. The lacha is that animal remains in the Kedusha as we brought as a Shlamim. Amar Rava says, Rava lo yishanu the din of the Mishnah is only Shenimsa Achar HaShchita. You found the original Karban Pesach after you already slaughtered the new Karban Pesach, and then the Hamer Ba'achar Shchita. And similarly, after the original Pesach was slaughtered, you exchanged the original one for a different animal. So again, you have Pesach A that you lost. You find Pesach B. You shechted Pesach B. Then you found Pesach A. And then you know what else you did? You try to take the Kedusha off of A and put it on C. So what happens now? A and C retain their sanctity and they both have to be shechted as a carbon. They're both a shlamim. Aval nimsa koidem shchita. Let's say you found the original animal before you shechted the new animal. And then you exchange it achar shchita. And after you shechted, you exchange it. Then tumurasai mikai kedusha dechuya kasi. The tumura, the exchange, is coming from a kedusha which is pushed off. Meaning because you found the animal before it was shechted, again I lost A, I designated B, before I shechted B, I found A, so that animal is pushed away from being Gadash, because I now have a new animal, then I exchange it, the lacha is v'loi karva, you cannot bring neither A nor its exchange as a carbon because it was pushed away. Eisvei, let's see a question of the Gemara. Eisvei Abai, 5 lines from the white lines. Im kesef, says in the Torah, if im kesef, extra words, matam le'rim im kesef, the rabbis comes to include temuras ha-pesach achar ha-pesach shekar v'shlamim. If you exchange a carbon Pesach after the Pesach, we don't know what those words mean. The halacha is, it is a shlamim. Hichadami, what's the case? If you're telling me the case is you found it after the slaughtering, and then you exchange it after the slaughtering, like the first din of Rava, says Gemara, Pshita, that's obvious, of course you bring it as a carbon. Lama likra, why would need a pasuk? Elalav shenimsa kaidem shchita vehemer ba when achar shchita, and yet it's telling me that you bring it as a carbon. A kasha on Rava who said you do not bring it as a carbon. Answers the Gemara, loy lo'ilam shenimsa achar shchita vehemer ba achar shchita, like we originally thought. So what's the chiddush across machta ba'alma? The pasuk is just an asmachta. Elakra lamai also. So what's the chiddush of the pasuk? Kedetanya kesef the rabbi pesach la'alya. A different day, and it comes to include the tail of the carbon Pesach has to be burnt as well. When the Torah says im kesef the rabbi's pesach l'shavar shenasai, the year passed u'shlamim haba and machas pesach the carbon shlamim, which is brought for a pesach l'chol mitzvahs shlamim. It says all the halachas of the carbon Pesach. Number 1, shetan smicha, you got to lead with your full might on the animal. When nisachim, you have the libation. Tunuvas chaza v'shaik, you have to wave the chaza and the shaik. But then when the Torah continues and says ve'im eis hefsekainian limei, to teach me that this din does not apply to the eis, the tail of the goat does not need to be burnt, and that is the first lashon of Rava. Tomorrow, as you'll see over here, we have an ika damasni la areisha, which we're going to have tomorrow. Again, just to conclude, we had Rava who taught us a pshat. The Gemara had a question, and the Gemara is deflecting that question. Really, it's like the case we thought originally that you found it after the shechita, and therefore the animal is a wonderful animal. You could bring it as a carbon shlamim. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is that it's a cross machta ba'alma, and it teaches me a different din. A din about the tail is also going to be burnt. We'll pick up from here tomorrow.